think we're ready to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're here today to talk about the next phase of our Strengthening Rural Community Colleges initiative. So we're really excited to share all of this information with you. We've been fortunate to receive additional funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to continue and build on our work. So we will be allowing plenty of time for questions at the end, but as always, feel free to just pop anything into the chat as we go. My name is Rachel Rush-Marlowe. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Senior Program Manager here at ACCT, responsible for our rural portfolio. And I'm joined by Ji-Hang Lee, who I'm sure you all know, our Senior Vice President. So I want to start a little bit today just by talking about some of the findings and work that we did in the initial phase of this project. For those of you who might not be as familiar with the work, we published a report in February of this year that was the culmination of 18 months of work. We interviewed hundreds of college presidents, trustees, and other stakeholders in rural communities to kind of do some information gathering and find out a little bit more about the landscape of what our rural community colleges look like. Of course, foundational to that is what it means to be a rural college. And that's not something that we were fully able to tackle in our work. It's a huge topic and something that we understand still needs a lot more consideration in terms of the definition. But we just wanted to recognize, as we did in our report, that the definition of what it means to be a rural serving institution is much larger than the definition provided by the Department of Education, as well as many of the other federal definitions that exist. The report that we put out highlighted three main challenge areas that we heard over and over again from our colleges, and those were broadband, addressing student basic needs, particularly in the area of mental health, as well as funding disparities, both at the local, state, and federal level. And so one thing that we heard repeatedly from our institutions was that, regardless of the state that they were located in, and we primarily focused in 5 states throughout this report, that there were funding disparities and that the structure of funding formulas in every state that we looked at were disadvantaging rural colleges. When we actually dug in a little bit and looked at the data in IPEDS, what we found was that overall nationwide, rural colleges are, if you follow the Department of Ed definition, which we understand to be problematic, but that rural colleges are not necessarily funded at lower levels than their peers, but their costs of operating are much higher. So there's definitely some more work to be done in investigation there, but that was a major challenge that we found across the 5 states we worked in, which were Texas, California, Iowa, Kentucky, and California. The report also highlighted case studies in each of the states that we looked at, as well as some interviews that we did with several of our tribal colleges. And we found that in our rural colleges, there's already a lot of great work being done. Despite funding issues and the other challenges that exist, our rural colleges are doing great work to support their students as well as their communities. And so we highlighted a few programs that focus on student housing, as well as wraparound supports and a number of other topics. From this report, we came away with a few different recommendations at the local, state, and federal level. And these are mostly focused locally around building relationships. We heard from many of our participants that a lot of strength came from partnership, and that when you live and work in a rural community, everyone's a volunteer. I think one of my favorite quotes from this work was one of our college presidents saying, I didn't sign up to be mayor, but that's the job in our community. College president goes much beyond that. And so we looked at a lot of different ways in which our community colleges can build on these relationships. At the state level, again, a lot of the work we found goes back to funding models, as well as removing roadblocks to accessible broadband access. At the state level, while it seems that there's broad agreement that broadband is a challenge and that there should be more state support, there's actually legislation on the books in many states that prevent this from being possible. And then at the federal level, again, going back a little bit to the areas around definitions and finding ways to redefine and revamp rural support and make sure that at the federal level, we have that engagement and support for our institutions. And so from out of all of this work, there were a few areas that we thought warranted further work and ways that we thought we'd be able to further support our institutions. And so I'll let Ji-Hang give a little introduction to what we'll be doing next.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. We're happy to have announced last month that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has renewed their financial commitment to ACCT to support our rural community colleges and the work that we've been doing with our member institutions. So this phase of our work that we have embarked on, it will last for 17 months, starting June 1st last month, and will continue on till November 1st of 2022. It seems like a long time, but it's actually a relatively short time for us as we start planning. There are three main components of our work that we will be doing with the membership. Number one is create a peer learning network. Our focus around this is to ensure that community college leaders have some type of communication format to share best practices and to have a cross-flow of information about funding opportunities, either philanthropic or federal grants oriented. Number two, create a technical support structure. One of the things that Rachel and I, when we did our visits and did our Zoom calls in the past year and a half, we heard from many institutions asking for assistance on how to do grant writing, how to find additional information, and we're hopeful to provide some assistance to our member institutions going forward around these key areas. And then number three is to really connect some resources to our membership that would be relevant to our rural ACCT members. We will continue to utilize our rural.acct.org website, so please encourage you to visit that site. We will be posting all of our webinars that we'll be providing and additional opportunities as we go forward for this project. Next slide. The goal of our project and what we have committed to the foundation is to seek a minimum of 55 institutions participation across this network. So therefore, the way that we typically set our member institutions, we kind of look at it from a regional perspective. So we are looking to gather at least 10 member institutions to participate in our network, 10 from the Pacific, Western, Southern, Central, and Northeast. If you don't know which region you're in, we can let you know. And another part of our work will be to at least enlist 5 of our tribal colleges for participation. Our colleges and our tribal colleges were very active participants in our recent project, and we continue to highlight the work of these institutions. So we're hopeful this preliminary conversation, many of our institutions will participate, and we will be sending out some type of survey asking your institution to participate in this learning network. Okay. So Rachel, why don't you go through these next couple of slides and we'll open it up to some discussion with our member institutions.
Great, thank you, Jihang. And I want to just highlight a few of the things that Jihang talked about as well. I think through our conversations with our institutions and partners over the last few months, those that we were fortunate enough to be able to have in person prior to the pandemic, and the continuing conversations we've had over Zoom, one thing really resonated with us, and that was in a lot of these meetings, we tried to engage multiple partners at the same time. So we'd have large group conversations. And I can't tell you the number of times that, somebody on the call would say, well, hold on a minute, how did you implement that at your institution? Oh, well, which program did you take advantage of? How did you finance that? And really sparked some great conversations. And one thing that we heard from a lot of these partners was that they didn't always have opportunities to have these types of conversations. And so that's something that we really want to help facilitate as part of this work. And as well as Jihang mentioned, the grant application processes we understand are really complicated and can be difficult to find staffing, resourcing, and get through a lot of the jargon, especially with federal applications. And so these were 2 big areas that we felt like we could jump in and continue and further this work to help our rural institutions thrive and develop new projects and partnerships in these areas. As far as the direction of these, of the peer learning network and what we are striving to do, right now it's fairly open, and we've done that intentionally. We really want to make sure that we're not driving this just based on, what we heard in the first phase of the project, or what, we might have as priorities at ACCT, or our, personal biases about the work. But we really want our institutions and partners to be able to drive the direction of this. We want this to be as beneficial and useful as possible. We know everyone has Zoom fatigue. We don't want this to just be, one more monthly meeting that someone from your institution is coming to. We want this to really be meaningful and productive, and an opportunity to learn from one another. And so, as Jihang mentioned, we'll be sending out some surveys over the next few weeks, trying to gauge kind of what the interest is and where things might be most beneficial. And that's also part of the purpose of this webinar today. We really want this to be a discussion and to hear from you all about where you think this could most benefit your institutions. And so we really, again, want colleges participating in the initiative to drive this. As far as participation, as Jihang mentioned, we are targeting a minimum of 55 institutions, but that's by no means a cap. And, we've already gotten some questions about who can participate, how they can participate. And so, I want to make it clear that we're certainly not tied to any narrow definitions of rural institution. You don't have to qualify under the Department of Ed's definition in order to participate in this initiative. If you think that this would be a good fit or something that you'd like your institution to be involved with, or we've also spoken to some of our state associations. If this is a project that you'd like to get involved in, please just reach out and we'll, figure out what that might look like for your institution. As far as timeline, we just wanted to go through really some high-level points, and also talk a little bit about time commitment. So again, we really want this to be member-driven and driven based on the needs and interests of those who participate. And so, I don't want to make any really specific mention of time commitment, because that will be kind of based on how the group progresses. But we do intend to have approximately once a month webinars and trainings. And those, again, will be dictated by the group's interests. But right now we have a few different potential options and participants we're looking at as far as helping assist with those trainings. So we've been working very closely over the first phase of the grant with USDA. They have a rural development center, and they offer a variety of different loan programs that we know have benefited some of our rural institutions. So we'd really love to bring them on board to participate if that's something that we see there's an interest in. We've also been interested in looking at some of our other partners more in the sports arena. And looking at the ways in which those types of programming can impact enrollment at rural institutions. So just a few different ideas there. As far as timeline, right now we're in the process of establishing the cohort, doing outreach. That's part of what today is all about, to get some institutions and associations involved with this work. As I mentioned, we'll be sending out a survey shortly once we have that cohort established, to try and get an idea of the direction and who we should be reaching out to as we build out these resources and build out these virtual trainings. Upcoming in the next few months, there'll also be a great opportunity to meet in person at the Rural Community College Alliance annual conference. That will be held in North Carolina in September. And then again, we're targeting an in-person meeting from October 13th to 16th as part of ACCT's annual Congress. And then following that, as I mentioned, we'll be providing these resources and training sessions as we go, based on interest and different involvement of our state and federal partners. So I have our contact information here. Also, our report and more information about this project and initiative is available on our website, rural.acct.org. So if you haven't read the report yet, I encourage you to check it out. And if you want to learn more about this initiative, please feel free to email Jihang or myself, or go online and look for the information there. If I haven't missed anything, Jihang, I think we can open it up more broadly to questions, comments.
Yep. We have a question in the queue right now from Roger. deals with what's the institutional cost for engagement. There is no institutional cost for participation in our learning network. We would like a designated person or two at your institution to dial in and give us institutional feedback about each of the webinars and the learning opportunities. We are participating at the RCCA conference, and we will also be participating at obviously our annual meeting in October. So if you choose to visit us in either of those locations, there will be an associated cost for your institution if you do travel. But there is no cost to participate and to provide feedback and even provide us ideas on sessions or topics for us to bring forward to all of you. There is also a question relative to the region that Maryland is in. And I'm happy to report that Maryland is in the Northeast region. So that's one of the 5. And yes, and Rachel, we do have a regional map that's kind of up there on our website. So what we wanted to do was provide this opportunity for all of you to kind of, if you had questions about what we're doing, and then also, okay, we have some other questions. Okay.
I can jump in.
Sure, go ahead.
So I'll go chronologically. I also just wanted to mention I took a quick screenshot of our regional map and I dropped that in the chat. But if you go to our main homepage and just scroll down, you can kind of see it there as well. So Liam, thank you for your question. The webinars, I apologize on the timeline, it makes it look like we'll be starting those in November. We're hoping to get started a little bit earlier, but that depends on participation of our external partners. So webinars will be starting, we hope, in September and continuing once a month through the duration of the program. For the participant selection process, we're trying to be as fair as possible as we do this. And so I would say if you're interested in getting involved in this, please just reach out to us and we will be back in touch. Right now, we don't have any set members that have joined the cohort. And so we're still pretty open in terms of how this process will go.
Yeah, and I would just add, our goal is to get a minimum of 55 institutions across this network. If we have 200, we're happy to have 200. So I think for our vantage point, we would like as many institutions as that are participating in this effort. And like I said, we will be sending out a formal communication to the membership to ask institutions to participate in this process.
Absolutely. As far as what a rural college is, again, that really depends on who you ask, but for the purposes of this project, I think we'd like to be as broad as possible and inclusive as possible. We recognize that we have a number of members that are, what we would consider rural serving institutions that serve primarily rural student base or are located in areas that are, very rural, but don't necessarily meet the Department of Education's definition. So as Jihang mentioned, we'd like to get as many members involved as possible in this effort. And so I wouldn't worry too much about, which state or federal definitions your institution falls under.
And in addition, there was a question about some of the learning opportunities and some other things. So number one, we are working, for an example, in conjunction with the National Legislative Summit. We are having preliminary conversations with our friends at AACC and also our RCCA to host some type of rural day in conjunction with NLS to bring in federal stakeholders to meet with your institutions to talk about, one, grant opportunities, but also to highlight some of the rural legislative priorities that are in conjunction with ACCT's policies, priorities. Dan, oh, yep.
Go ahead, Jihang.
Dan, thank you for our Western's participation, and I know that you're one of the chairs of on the President's Committee for NJCCA. We have had preliminary conversations with NJCCA to have a conversation around enrollment and supporting rural community college enrollment through athletics. So that is something that we are looking to do. Rachel, you want to handle the deliverables section?
Sure. I think this is also a little bit related to kind of participation, and we've had a few questions about participation and registration as well. So again, for the time being, feel free to just email Jihang or myself if you're interested, although we will be sending out a more formal announcement and request for interest and participation in the coming weeks. But for the time being, you can just send us an email letting us know you'd like to be involved, and we can kind of go from there. As far as participation in each of the meetings, I think that, again, we'd like to keep this fairly open. And so we don't want to, overburden staff. If you have staff members, on your team that you think could benefit from some of the trainings we'll be doing and not others, I think we're certainly open to being flexible as far as allowing, kind of flexible engagement in different training sessions. Jihang, do you want to take the question about being a current ACCT member?
So I guess one of the questions I have is, are you an institution? Because one of our goals is to have 55 institutions part of our learning network. So for us, that's one element. But Larissa, I'm happy to have a conversation about your institution's participation if you are an institution on this.
So we've had another few questions. Someone asked about response from federal or state reps for our with regards to our call to expand broadband. I would say that that's certainly something that's in progress and in flux right now. We have seen increased flexibility in a number of different federal regulations with regard to how institutions can use relief fund dollars. At the state level, we've also seen this as well in a number of states that are allowing some coronavirus relief fund dollars to go directly to ensuring that there's expanded broadband access either on campus or for students. But we certainly hope to see more progress there in the future as well. As far as the training sessions, we are going to have certain defined topics for each one. And again, we'd like that to be really driven by the membership of the cohort. But as we mentioned, we have a few different starting points. Some federal partners we're already engaging with who we know have really great resources and training available. And so we'd like to be able to connect them with you all. And so, just for example, again, the USDA Rural Development Program has been a really strong partner, and we know already that they would love to do a training session. So that's one that we have kind of teed up, and as well as potentially with NJCAA. Beyond that, we really want this to be member driven. And so, what you would like to see in the trainings is what we will endeavor to do. And I think that's a great question as well. I see about colleges that are primarily rural or those that have a mixture of rural and urban campuses. We'll absolutely, would like to consider that in our cohort as well. We know that, most institutions try to put their main campuses in more populated areas, right? And so, again, you might not necessarily fall under these very typical definitions of rural while still having branch campuses or other campuses in more rural communities and still have the same needs as our colleges that are more traditionally rural. So absolutely.
And I would just note that as Rachel said that, we have branch campuses and we also have statewide systems. Larissa, I believe you're part of the New Hampshire system, and the New Hampshire Community College System is a member of ACCT. So while your individual campus might not be a member of ACCT, your membership actually derives from the system office. So we would be happy to have you in your participation. Other questions from the group? So one of the efforts that Rachel and I would like to embark on as we start, we've answered a number of questions, is to really kind of utilize this opportunity to hear from all of you with some specific items that you would like to be covered by this learning network. If there are some strategies, for example, around enrollment, is enrollment a key factor? Is new revenue streams a factor? Are there other items that beyond what I just mentioned that the network would like us to cover and provide some speakers and some possible solutions? Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Yvonne.
Wondering, hi. In our rural areas, transportation is often a major concern. So is that an initiative that you would perhaps include in this program?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great question. Transportation is something that came up pretty frequently as a major challenge with our institutions that we spoke to in the first phase of the project. However, we started our interviews and conversations in January of 2020. And so, pretty shortly into it, the issue of transportation changed pretty drastically. And so that wasn't something that we included in our initial report just because things have looked so different over the past year. But as many communities become vaccinated and the world begins to reopen, I think that that's pretty top of mind for a lot of our rural institutions and communities. And so I think that that's a great suggestion for something to focus on. I would also just kind of give a brief shout out to the Selden Herring Foundation. They've recently published a map, and I'll see if I can get the link in the chat, looking at public transportation access for community colleges, not just in rural areas, but nationwide. And so they have some really interesting work that they've done in that area that perhaps we could build on as well. But I'll share that in the chat for anyone who might be interested in seeing that as well.
And Yvonne, I would just note for you, I believe Williamsburg Technical College in South Carolina actually provides buses for their students to gain to access their institution. Obviously, I believe this was pre-pandemic, so I don't necessarily know the status of it today, but that was something that was described to me actually when the last time I was in South Carolina in January of 2020. Some items that were included here so everybody can see: shared resources for small districts like grant research, economic development. We've heard economic development to be a big item. Federal apprenticeships with Department of Agriculture, fiber broadband. Items like enrollment, downsizing of institutions, an advocacy initiative, more grant funding primarily for rural institutions and priority points, specifically for rural and with different definitions than what USDA uses. Yes, the rural definition is something that we continue to strive to get the ears of Capitol Hill to make sure that there are some modifications going forward.
Seeing in the Q&A as well, sort of marketing around the value of a community college degree, stereotypes around blue collar work. That's definitely something that came up a lot in phase one of our project as well. And we heard some really interesting ideas that perhaps we can get some of our colleges to share about the work they've done. There's some institutions in Kentucky that have done a lot of work around kind of rebranding what community college means, getting a lot of communities, people that live in the community on campus just to kind of, have that feeling of being there and understanding what the institution is all about, as well as, kind of partnering with high schools and doing some college signing days to show that, college signing is not just for elite athletes, but for a variety of pathways. And so we've already heard some really interesting different ideas there. And so I'd love to build on that more, absolutely.
and some pipeline programs partnering around K through 12, obviously dual enrollment programs and other state four-year partners. And then another one was around effectively and affordably providing food service in rural community colleges. We know from our report, basic needs was a major conversation of our report, and we know this is of dire importance, especially for our students in rural communities and candidly in all of our campuses across the country. Okay.
Well, everyone has been sharing some really fantastic ideas, and we really appreciate your brainstorming efforts. We'd love to hear from all of you more, as we mentioned. And so if you're interested in joining the cohort, or even if you maybe don't feel that it's a good fit for your institution to join, but want to provide some more feedback and ideas like the ones that have been shared today, please reach out to Jihang or myself. I'll just drop our email addresses here in the chat again. And I think we may be able to wrap up a little early today.
Giving you extra time back is always a good thing. As the other plea that we would make is that I know some of you are shy to post something in chat. So if you have additional items that you would like to bring to the forefront for us, things that we should be providing some guidance on to the membership, please send us an email also in conjunction to your participation so that we have that information. And okay, great, Chris. It's great to see you this afternoon also. We should probably touch base about those briefs. So, oh, the briefs are already out. Okay.
Well, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Okay,
we look forward to working with you all.
Thank you again, everyone. Take care, and we will hopefully see you all soon in person or on Zoom. Thank you again.